Welcome back to another edition of Scherable. I'm your host, Bill Scher, back on the back porch on a very chilly Tuesday evening. And I want to talk about some of the data that's come in regarding uh, Biden and Trump performance in people of color communities and what that might mean for the parties and legislation going forward. The New York Times did an analysis of the Georgia demographics, saying that the share of the black vote was down, even though turnout was up, all across the board, including with African Americans. That didn't rise as fast as other groups, and that was a surprising observation, since folks assumed that robust African American turnout was a big part of the coalition that was built. The Times is arguing that it was the suburban vote, which of course the suburbs are diverse in the Atlanta area and plenty of other places. But since the overall black share was down, that suggested that white suburban vote was a dominant driver. And we're still picking over what's happened with South Florida and the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, and why the Latino vote, Hispanic vote, seem to turn towards Trump very dramatically in those particular areas, although not so much in Nevada and Arizona. And these types of conversations tend to be delicate. I tweeted a data point about the Georgia thing, and immediately that gets people discussing, who gets the most credit. Are you saying that black voters don't deserve the credit for Georgia? Are you saying that this means the Democrats seem to focus more on white suburbanites than African American voters? And that to me that's not the takeaway as far as I'm concerned. And we also can bicker over the exact numbers and what the numbers mean, the share and the turnout rise and all that kind of stuff. And that to me is a little beside the point. The bigger, as far as the Democrats are concerned, I think the overall takeaway is that they need everybody. They need a big tent, diverse coalition. They can't solely rely on people of color. They can't solely rely on white suburbanites. They can't even ignore non-college whites. They're not going to win them, but they can't completely write them off, because they want to not have those margins be too wide in the Republicans' favor. So exit polls say that Trump got 12% of the black vote versus 8% last time. So Democrats still won. So even though Trump made a marginal improvement with African Americans, if you trust the exit polls, and exit poll data is shaky, so we shouldn't necessarily treat that as gospel. It's still the case that Democrats won the lion's share of the African American vote, and did very well with college educated white suburbanites, and didn't hit rock bottom with white working class. So all of that came together for a Democratic victory. That to me is the most important thing in terms of where Democrats are concerned. So, so going forward, so what do you do in Georgia right now? Well, you have to be mindful of all the constituencies. You can't solely assume that you're going to run up the score with one particular group. You have to be very balanced with your strategy and make sure you're maintaining that Big Ten coalition. And I think we're also learning. We keep saying these groups aren't monolithic, and it becomes clearer and clearer how true that is. Latinos in Arizona are not Latinos in Nevada, are not Latinos in Texas, are not Latinos in Florida, and even within those states, there's differentiation. So we can't make lazy assumptions about what it's going to take to improve in these constituencies. Someone that I follow on Twitter, I'm going to botch his last name because I'm terrible with names, Mark Yazaguirre, has a nice piece in Ordinary Times called MAGA in the RGV, the Rio Grande Valley, and he was careful not to claim he is, the authority on the Latino vote, but he did grow up in that Rio Grande Valley area and had a nice, at least helpful for me, dissection of how politically and culturally diverse that Latino vote is, and why it was wrong to assume that if you could increase the because the turnout was always low there, so there was always the assumption if you could just increase that turnout, if you just register those voters and get them to turn out, they'll obviously be Democratic, and that proved not to be true. They care about oil and gas jobs. A lot of them work for the Border Patrol, so it's a lot more complicated than at least a number of people assumed. So it shows that Democrats can't take any of these constituencies for granted. They have to work for them. They have to be present in the communities. They have to listen to what folks are saying. I just picked up on an NPR today that, speaking to one voter in the Rio Grande Valley, that they felt that Democrats didn't deliver for them on immigration reform. They talk and talk and talk about immigration reform. They don't deliver, and therefore should vote Republican this time. Which, to my mind, that's highly illogical. It's not the Democrats' fault they didn't deliver, because Republicans were being very obstructionist. But a vote's a vote, and that voter's calculations mattered for her vote, and Democrats had to do something else to convince her otherwise. This also, in my mind, so as frustrating as that might be from a Democratic perspective, that Trump was able to seemingly improve in these constituencies, and perhaps turnout wasn't as robust, even where even when sentiment was favorable to Democrats, wasn't as robust as Democrats might have liked. There is a positive, not just for Democrats, but for America generally, that Republicans made some inroads there, which is that the more Republicans realize that the African American and Latino Hispanic constituencies are not inherently adverse to them, that they can compete for those votes, that might make the Republican Party be, less racist, less racially divisive, more open to policies that would be beneficial to those constituencies. One of the problems that Barack Obama had in trying to get immigration reform passed, he got through the Senate, got Republican support there. There are Republicans that have been for immigration reform. Ronald Reagan was pro-immigrant. Plenty of corporate donors are pro-immigrant. They want that labor. But it got blocked in the Senate in part because there are people like Rush Limbaugh saying, you're just legalizing a bunch of Democratic voters. Why would you help Democrats get more voters? And that's a lazy assumption on the Republicans' part, on those conservatives' part. There are conservatives now that assume that if Puerto Rico was made a state, it would automatically be a Democratic state. And there's an argument today. I think there's some polling to suggest that it's a Democratic-leaning state today, but states can swing. Georgia was a Republican state not too long ago, and now it isn't. If Republicans were part of the team that made Puerto Rico a state and then competed for those votes, then maybe it would be a swing state. So their minds might start to change, seeing that they were able to attract votes in key areas, flipping House seats in South Florida, keeping Texas 23, which a lot of folks thought was a certainty for Democrats. So that's one of the reasons why bullish might be a strong word, but I'm certainly fairly optimistic that an immigration reform bill could pass, even in a narrowly divided or even Republican-controlled Senate, because those stars could still align. You still have the corporate support there, and you will still have support, on the Democratic side. And if that nativist wing of the Republican Party, if that is taken down a peg, because Republicans are not as afraid of that constituency because they realize they might still well keep those votes, or I should even say perhaps some of those hardcore conservatives are just not as antagonistic towards Latinos because they saw how well they did in these Latino areas in South Texas and South Florida. One of the things that makes bipartisanship possible is when it can be communicated that this potential bill is not going to disproportionately help one party over the other. It's one of the things that LBJ did with the Republicans of the 1960s, saying if we do this together, then it's not going to be a vote boon for one side or the other. Of course, and in many respects, it ended up being bad for Democrats in the short, in politically in the South, because all those states eventually flipped over to Republicans. So if Biden can communicate to Republicans, hey, this is going to be good for you, or at least a wash if we do this together, and it's going to make some of your donors happy, then let's do it. I wouldn't say that's a certainty, but I think that you can see the opening there for making that case. And the other way to look at it, the negative, cynical way to look at it is, well, Trump was still doing lots of racist things, divisive things. But there was one Wisconsin observer that said that they had an anti-Latino message for blacks and an anti-black message for Latinos. So it certainly is possible they're going to keep doing lots of nasty things to try to pick off small pieces of these constituencies, and that would be enough to be more competitive. Obviously, it wasn't enough to actually win an election this time around, but keeps them in the ball game. So they may decide to stick with the racist strategy that they have. But I can't be a mind reader about what Republicans are going to do, but I do think it is possible. And mind you, there are more people of color rising up through the Republican ranks. You have Tim Scott in South Carolina. They just got 2 Korean American women winning races in Southern California, plus 2 Cuban Americans winning in South Florida. The more those voices are inside the party, the harder it might be for the party to do more overtly racist things. And that's just good, period. It's not super great for Democrats if more votes are Republican. So I understand the hesitancy to be excited if you're a Democrat that they're not getting those votes. But if we want to have a less polarized country, a less racist country, if we want to have an opening for more unifying policies, we need the Republican Party to stop playing the old Southern strategy. So that to me is the silver lining, the potential silver lining out of what has transpired. And we'll see how well Biden is able to take these results and turn them into something positive. Well, I'll leave it there for this edition of Scherable. Bill Scher. My name is Bill Scher. If you want to support this financially, go to patreon.com/Bill Scher. Or if you want to support it in a non-monetary way, please click subscribe. And I'll be back soon with another edition of Scherable. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care.